Hello, BookTube. These are confusing times in the OGBG epic haul wars. On the one hand, Bill Rutenberg of the Rutenberg Library has recently called for a ceasefire of however temporary a duration, but on the other hand, Sean Standfast is constantly talking about a bunker buster book haul that he has in the works. So are they in cahoots? The one to get us to lower our guard and the other to deliver the coup de grace? I have no idea. I know that Mark Richardson up in Vermont made a couple of book hauls in a row, including an epic Star Trek book haul that had me salivating. So I don't know whether or not what to call today's video. I had an appointment bitterly early this morning, and when it was finally done, I was a block away from the Brattle bookshop here in Boston. A great used bookstore that is my home away from home. I've been going there forever. There are staff members there. I have been a customer at the Brattle longer than some of those staff members have been alive, and I've loved it every minute. And I got a bunch of books. Of course, I got a bunch of books. I swear, I think I could probably get a bunch of books every day if I went to the Brattle. In fact, there have been many years where I did that. There were many years where I worked in a retail bookstore a block or two away from the Brattle bookshop, and at lunch I would go to the Brattle every day, almost every day, and I would always come back with a bag of stuff. So I got a bunch of books that I want to show you and talk to you about, and we can just postpone how we're going to characterize these books. Is this a further act of aggression? Or is this a peacetime book haul? I don't know. I honestly don't know. I'm going to have to wait and see what the next week unfolds. But in the meantime, I have a bunch of goodies that I want to show you. And we'll start off, as we do so many times with Brattle book hauls, with a mass market murder mystery. Brattle has a large selection of mass market murder mysteries, and I fell in love all over again with mass market murder mysteries in the year 2020. And that love hasn't gone anywhere lately. So I mentioned in a few Brattle hauls recently that my sweet tooth for murder mysteries is English country village murder mysteries. Thatched huts, a tiny little out-of-the-way place, the train on a schedule, 2 villages over, and the organist dying almost universally. Don't know what these murder mystery authors have against village organists, but they're almost always the ones to die. And I got a mass market murder mystery today, but it's not a village country house murder at all. And it's also by an author you don't associate with murder mysteries. This is Murder at the ABA by Isaac Asimov, the American Booksellers Association has routinely an annual convention. I don't think they had one last year. I'm pretty sure it was virtual last year, but used to be a place where writers and publishers and agents and everybody would go to schmooze and get drunk and make little arrangements here and there and whatnot. And Isaac Asimov was a guest many, many times, and you just know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, you don't need to consult with any kind of autobiography to know that the idea for this mystery came to him when he was there. He thought, what if there was a murder at the ABA? And that's what this is, but I got it because it's kind of thematically associated with the last murder mystery that I got at the Brattle, The Death of a Mystery Writer by Robert Barnard. This is also about the death of a murder mystery writer. Do I have a plot summary here? When the protege of writer Darius Just suddenly turns up murdered at the celebrated annual publishing convention, chaos and suspense sweep the autographing sessions, the buffet tables, the bars, and the famed hospitality suites. Darius is certain he can discover the murderer if the murderer doesn't find him first. So it's, once again, the death of a murder mystery writer. I'm going to give it a try. The thing I like about these mass market murder mysteries, they are not, I always say that when I go to the Brattle, I am looking for keepers. I'm looking for books that I'm not just going to cycle through. Because that, on one level, strikes me as a little wasteful, but when it comes to mass market murder mysteries, I am perfectly willing to cycle through. I'm perfectly willing to do that. Only I won't cycle through, because there's no point in trading this back to the Brattle for credit. It would be a penny, or 2 pennies. So there's no point in doing it. So slowly but surely what's happening is that I am popping these things down like Pez, and then keeping them. Slowly but surely, I am amassing a murder mystery library of my own, but that's okay. That's all right. Oh, God, I thought I had the ergonomics all set out here. I have props and everything this time around, and I have separate shelves, but maybe I don't have enough of them. Well, anyway, we'll figure it out as we go along. Next one is mass market science fiction, which is, again, a thing I don't often do. I have mountains of science fiction in mass market already, and quite a few of you over the course of the last year have been very generous giving me ebooks from your own collection, sending along PDFs or EPUB or MOBI files of ebooks from your own collection, including lots of science fiction. But my 6 or 7 people who have been most active in giving me ebooks have fallen asleep at the wheel when it comes to this particular author. It's Frank Herbert, and this is Destination Void. And it's not that you've fallen asleep at the wheel in terms of getting me this author. I have the Dune series, absolutely. But all the rest of the books that he wrote, Destination Void came out, I think, as a book. I think it came out in the exact same year as Dune. He wrote, in other words, Frank Herbert wrote a lot of standalone and series science fiction that had nothing to do with Dune. And I have always loved it. Not particularly this cover. Again, I want to ask Mark Richardson, because he would probably know off the top of his head. Was it Del Rey that did the next set of Frank Herbert non-Dune covers? They had bright colors. Destination Void was one of them. The Jesus Incident, a whole bunch of other things. They all had obviously the same cover design, probably the same cover artist. It was the run of them after this that I remember and that I fell in love with most of them for. But this, as you can tell, that is a gigantic human brain. This is a very complex story about a generation sleeper ship on its way to a far distant planet. That is run by a giant disembodied human brain. But there are a number of Frank Herbert things that happen in this book. I mean, that you can see running as sort of motifs through his Dune books. At the back of the Dune books is the Butlerian Jihad, for instance, an event that takes place before we start the novel Dune. It takes place long before that, in which a commandment was added to the human lexicon: "Thou shalt not make machines in the image of a man." You can't make artificial intelligence. Frank Herbert had an abiding distrust of artificial intelligence, and I remember correctly. It's been a long time since I read Destination Void. I remember correctly. This had many sequels, but I think this book stands alone. I think you can read it by itself without worrying about the sequels. But if I remember correctly, the artificial intelligence in this thing, the artificial being the disembodied human brain, goes crazy, is evil, is a source of danger, which is true all through the Dune books. And also a number of other similarities. There's cloning in this book, for instance. And Frank Herbert flirts very, very generously with the whole concept of cloning all throughout the Dune books. Only he calls them Golas instead of clones in that series. But one way or another. And I'm racking my brains here because it's been a long time since I read this. It's right on the list to read right away. I'm kind of annoyed that these things aren't in print anymore. That Frank Herbert's Dune books will never go out of print. But his other science fiction, a lot of which is really good. Good luck finding it. It's not in bookstores. You'd never know. If you were a 16-year-old science fiction fan, you were in your science fiction aisle of your Barnes & Noble, you'd never know that Frank Herbert wrote anything else. But if I remember correctly, there's another Dune-style obsession that comes out in this book, which is also a Frank Herbert obsession just across his fiction, which is that the idea of a forced awakening, that some combination of exigency and trauma can force you to break through the limitations on your mind or your physicality or whatever. I seem to remember that happening in this book, but I might be confusing that with later books in this series. I don't know if I'm ever going to encounter any of those later books, but this was well worth it. So I'm gonna give it a try. And those were the 2 mass market paperbacks that I found this time around. Don't usually get mass market paperbacks. They were made to be cheap, so they don't hold up to rereading there. And I can be tough on my stuff. This next one's a perfect example of the kind of thing that you find in the sale lot of the Brattle, that a slightly less high turnover used bookstore with maybe a slightly more naive buying area might not know what to do with a book like this. They would probably overprice it. They would probably put it behind a counter somewhere. In the Brattle, you just find it outside, because the people who are doing the buying and the selling, the people who are doing the pricing at the giant buying table inside the store, take one look at it and know whether or not they can do anything with it. Whether or not it belongs on the third floor with actually collectible stuff, whether it belongs in the shop, with a $10 price tag on it, or whether it belongs outside for $1, $3, or $5. And this one was outside, and I have never read it. This is Hilaire Bellock. This is, can you see it with the glare there? Esto Perpetua, which is French for my tummy hurts. And this has a lovely, look at this thing that's just sort of tipped in there. It's just sort of glued onto that paper. This is travel writing. This author did first-rate travel writing, and that he's not known for. Of course, he's not remembered for that. He's hardly remembered at all. But he's not remembered for his travel writing at all. Even though I think one of his travel writing books, the one about crossing the mountains and descending down towards Rome on foot, one of the things that Bellock and I had in common, one of the only things we had in common, is that we both had a preferred method of travel on land, and that was to travel without any human companions and on foot, which slows you down quite a bit. You can do 15 miles a day if you're industrious about it, or you don't find a lot that you like, or much slower than that. Sometimes a couple of miles in a day. This is his book about traveling that way through Algeria at the beginning of the 20th century. And mainly with the same goal that I often had when it wasn't studying bats, it was analyzing Roman ruins. And that's what he does throughout this book. And it's full of, in addition to that color plate, let me see if I can find you an example here. It's full of all the illustrations, all the spot illustrations all throughout this thing are all done by him. It's just a lovely little thing that somebody gave a library binding to. So I don't know that I've ever read this. So I will give it a try. Absolutely. I don't imagine that I'm going to be disappointed. How are we going to work this so that things don't fall to the floor? I had a long conversation with Lord Ganesha about stopping things from falling to the floor. I said, surely that would require a miracle, and surely that's your province. And he said what he says to votaries all the time, which is, you should help yourself. And his devotees say that's because he cherishes free will and reliability, resilience in humans. They don't seem to go for the interpretation that maybe he's just lazy as all get out, one way or another. I'm going to try and arrange this so that there are no catastrophes. This next one is, I now notice one of two things very much like this in this pile. Interesting. Hadn't drawn that connection before. This is Jessica Midford. And this is her book, Poison Penmanship, The Gentle Art of Muckraking, which is, don't let the subtitle fool you. This is just a collection of various nonfiction pieces that she wrote over the years. It wasn't written, no matter what she said at the time, and no matter what her publisher said, it wasn't written with one theme in mind. This is just a collection of her occasional pieces. But her occasional pieces are so good that I don't mind. I'm glad to have it. I had this once before, and might have hauled it on this channel, and got rid of it right away. To one of you who had just finished a book that I love and don't have, a collection of her letters called Decca, D-E-C-C-A. One of you, I believe, one of you had just finished that collection and wanted to know if I could recommend anything else by Jessica Midford. Of course, I recommended The American Way of Death, but also her occasional pieces where her personality shines through a little clearer. But I don't have a copy of Decca. Anywho, this next one is a big fat biography. This is by Robert Richardson, and it is William James. And what was the dumb side? And in the Maelstrom of American Modernism. This is his big biography of the interesting James brother, and his name will be familiar to you. I have a prop here. His name will be familiar to you because he wrote one of the great biographies of the 20th century, Emerson, The Mind on Fire. And this is he wrote a number of other biographies, and this is one of them. And I have read this. I've read this, and I've read Jacques Barzun's book on William James, and I've read William James many, many times. I think he's fascinating, and I love also the Metaphysical Club. But I I just think he's fascinating, and I haven't read this book since it came out. When did this come out? It's got blurbs by Jay Perini, Tracy Critter, Robert Stone, Justin Kaplan, Stuart Dybeck. This came out in 2006. So right before I got back into reviewing, right before I would have been able to go to Mariner Books and say, I'm not dead, and I'd like a copy of your book. Right before I was able to do that. I've had this in hardcover and paperback a couple of times. I always manage to give it away, especially when I intrigue people by mentioning William James. They want to know more about him. But Richardson, as a biographer, can do no wrong. So then let me see here. Okay, the next one is this thing. Happy to see it, although I'm perfectly willing to admit right away that it's not a keeper. And it's not... It's the reason it's not a keeper is not because of its content. Its content is great. It's because of its presentation. It's a form that's going to fall apart as I read it. I just don't have it. I don't have any of the contents in here. It's this. It's The 17th Degree by the great Mary McCarthy in a rather cheap trade paperback. So I will be able to get a reading out of this thing, maybe two, but what I want is another one of my props. Library of America did this beautiful thing, the collected fiction of Mary McCarthy, and what I would, in 2 volumes, and what I would, there are all the reviews stuck in there, and what I would like the Library of America to do is follow through on their promise to me to do a 2-volume of her collected nonfiction, not just all of this stuff, but Humanist in the Bathtub, Memoirs of a Catholic Girlhood, all of the nonfiction. There's a pile of it. This is mostly her anti-Vietnam stuff. She was an early and very vocal opponent of the war in Vietnam. And 2 or 3 of the little books in here, she originally insisted on issuing as pamphlets, not paperbacks, and not little hardcovers, pamphlets. No idea why, except maybe she was thinking a citizen angrily ranting against the evils of the government belongs in pamphlet form. One way or another, you could see a mile away that no one was going to know what to do with that. Pamphlets don't fit on paperback spinner racks, which was the delivery method at the time. Hardcovers, they're not going to be stacked on a table anywhere. No one knew what to do with it. And true to form, in this collection, Mary McCarthy pens a quick introduction in which she spends almost the whole of it complaining about how no one ever reviewed those pamphlets. Because if you are a brainy hack, you're going to want people to notice what you're doing. You're not just doing it for the moral rectitude. But here it's a whole bunch of these things are collected. This is not a strong paperback. I won't even bother to reinforce it because it's not going to stay together anyway. But I might be able to get a whole reading out of it, which would be great. And also, it will be a joy to revisit the last thing here, Son of the Morning, which is not specifically about Vietnam, but it is virtuoso. It is an amazing performance. It is a long and absolutely Bach cantata perfect takedown of a book. It's a long and brutal, detailed, anatomical dissection of The Best and the Brightest by David Halberstam, which she doesn't start off fussing around like a lot of incendiary book takedowns do. She starts off right away with a jab right to the chin and just keeps going, just keeps hammering away. And it's a joy to read. An absolute joy to read. Even though I love the book, it's still a joy to read. It's a joy to see a smart, angry author so perfectly in control of their gifts. So I got this. It was dirt cheap. Everything here was dirt cheap. I got it even though I don't expect to keep it. I am waiting for the Library of America 2-volume box set in sewn binding, acid-free pages, hardcovers of the collected nonfiction of Mary McCarthy. Collected fiction has been out for 150 years now. The collection nonfiction. Anyway, anywho. The next one is also a biography. This is also a paperback. This is also a placeholder. I mean, it looks more strongly made than the 17th Degree, but not by much. I have reinforced it, but what I really want is the hardcover of this. This is David Herbert Donald Charles Sumner and the Coming of the Civil War. And I have a prop for this as well, because some of you will remember, when I was doing book repair videos, I did one of this, of David Donald's Charles Sumner and the Rights of Man. And if I remember, I'll leave a link to that video down below. This dust jacket was in terrible, terrible shape, and I pieced it all together. And while I was doing that, I gave you a talk, a boring little talk about Charles Sumner and what he was like and why he's important. And these two books go together, but what I really want is Charles Sumner and the Coming of the Civil War in hardcover, in a nice hardcover with a dust jacket, and the Brattle will provide. But right now, I can reread the book itself in this paperback, and help me to bide my time, because I don't have a copy of Charles Sumner and the Coming of the Civil War in hardcover with a dust jacket. I don't have such a thing. This next one is naval history, and it's by an author that I don't know why I got rid of this book. I had this copy. I had a copy of this book in advance, in hardcover, in trade paperback, from the publisher, all 3 times. I got rid of all 3 of them. I don't know why that is, because I loved it. The author is George Doggen, and this is If by Sea, which is a naval history of America from the time of George Washington to the War of 1812. And the War of 1812 is this author's specialty. And that is another one of my props, because he did what supplanted Hickey's book as the great book about the War of 1812. And I had these two forever and ever. No idea why I have 1812 and didn't have this. But it's been bugging me. It's been bothering me the whole time. Every time I look at that shelf, I would think, yeah, there's 1812. I wish I had If by Sea. So I found it and grabbed it. This time I won't be getting rid of it. Because this guy's tremendously good. He's just tremendously readable. This next one is also a great big biography. I have been waiting to find this thing. Maybe it was at the Brattle all along and I just missed it. But some of you will know from many videos that I've made on this channel what a fan I am of David Hume. Despite the fact that I hate the whole genre and practice of philosophy, I am a huge fan of David Hume. Actually, I have a huge biography of William James here as well. Nevertheless, I hate biography, and so should you. It's a total waste of your time to read. But biographies of philosophers, maybe not. And I finally found this. It was in rotten shape, so I reinforced it. This is Ernest Campbell Mossner's The Life of David Hume. And one thing I can't convey here in this video is how heavy this book is. It's really well made. It was in ratty shape, so maybe this has been at the Brattle all along, but it is so good. It is just one of those classic old-fashioned magisterial biographies, the footnotes at the bottom of the page, the author taking some aspect of their subject's life, reading literally everything that has ever been written by anyone about it, and then just writing it with complete authority. The thing that this kind of style of biography always reminds me of is J.C. Beaglehole's biography of Captain Cook, which is exactly the same way. Whether you're interested in the subject or not, you can read a bit of that book and just say, okay, all right, so whether I'm interested in Captain Cook or not, you know as much about this subject as anyone in the world ever has. Same thing with Herschel Parker's 2-volume biography of Herman Melville, where you're just reading it and saying, all right, well, no matter what I think of the subject, you know it perfectly well. You know it down to in every last detail. So I got this. It's been a long time since I read it. It's definitely a keeper though, which is nice. That is the whole point here. And this next one is a keeper as well for a little more personal reasons. This is Roosevelt: The Story of a Friendship by Owen Wister. I don't know if, knowing him, we're going to have a frontispiece of Roosevelt rather than a frontispiece of himself. Yes, we have a frontispiece of Roosevelt. This is Owen Wister, the author of The Virginian. It's the only claim to fame that he might have now. The Virginian, I believe, is out of print. All of the rest of the stuff that he wrote, the enormous pile of stuff that he wrote, is all out of print. All gone, and in print or not, Owen Wister as an author is completely forgotten. But he knew Roosevelt at Harvard. And he knew a whole bunch of other people too, just everybody. The set that Roosevelt started running with accepted Wister as one of their own, and He had a pen in hand the whole time. So he was writing. His book on Roosevelt is amazing. It makes no pretense to be a critical biography. It doesn't take the place of Edmund Morris or any other Theodore Roosevelt biographer, but it's indispensable if you want to know what the man was like, and it can make you laugh. Very much, this book can make you laugh. The anecdotes are wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. And they convey a sense that Roosevelt gave to his intimates of being in on a joke, of being in on a slightly juvenile joke that isn't acceptable for polite society since we're all adults here. Roosevelt had a knack for doing that has hardly been exceeded by any occupant of the White House. And the effect of it was to create an atmosphere where at some official function or whatever, honoring an author or greeting a diplomat or a ball at the White House or whatever, at some official function, you have a line of people, all these people that Roosevelt knew as friends. Cecil Springrice, for instance, the ambassador, or William Howard Taft, or a bunch of other people. They'd all be in a receiving line. And they'd be busting a gut not to start laughing because they had just a minute before shared hilarious scuttlebutt about one of the people who was going through the receiving line. And I believe that it's possible to look at some photos of those receiving lines from the day and see quite a few, Roosevelt and quite a few of his intimates, trying hard not to start laughing. But anyway, Worcester captures that perfectly. But he also captures, there are wonderful pen portraits here of a lot of the people in Roosevelt's orbit. And I wanted to, I think I found one. Yeah, I found one for the great Henry Cabot Lodge that I want to read to you. I'm losing the pile here. Lord Ganesha obviously heard me gently mocking him. The pile is now ready to fall. I can't believe it's going to be a second video in a row where every single book falls to the floor. I can't believe that's going to happen. Anyway, let's read a little bit about Henry Cabot Lodge, shall we? He's talking first about here. Hold on a second. I wonder if there's a way for me to forestall this. It looks right now to be absolute inevitable. But is there a way for me to forestall it? Let's see if that works, because I don't want to read this to you while I'm worried about a crash to the floor. He's talking first about John Singleton Copley, the great American portrait artist who left when the going got tough in the American Revolution. He went to England to pursue his career. But if you're ever misfortunate enough to go through the Boston Museum of Fine Arts with me, for instance, or the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, you will see a number of Copley portraits, and I will bore you spitless about them. But that's the Copley he's referring to here, when he talks about who could capture Henry Cabot Lodge on the canvas. Copley, and only Copley, is the right man to have painted Henry Cabot Lodge. Many of Lodge's kin and townsfolk did sit for him in their departed day, but this is not the reason. Copley would not be at all the right man for Holmes or Adams, that's Oliver Wendell Holmes or Henry Adams. Would not be the right man at all for Holmes or Adams, whose kin and townsfolk he also painted. In those old portraits hanging in Harvard and Beacon Street, sire and dame, young and right, godly and ungodly, it is unmitigated Boston that you see recorded, the eye of a robust, stiff-necked race of 17th and 18th century dissenters, with its plain living, high thinking, dauntless intolerance, bleak bad manners, suppression of feeling, tenacity in its stern beliefs, and its cantankerousness, stares down at you with cold disapprobation. No Italian or Flemish master outdid Copley in catching the inner meaning of his contemporaries and setting it down. Boston in its fullest measure has produced both Holmes and Adams, but so much other than this has gone into them as they grew that the Copley type is marked in neither, while Cabot Lodge remains unmitigated Boston to the end. Nothing outside it ever really got into him deep. In his memoirs, his affection clings to it. Indeed, they exclude what's outside it too much, show that despite all he had seen, read, thought, lived, achieved, in an epoch teeming with a world of things Copley's people never dreamed of, all this had merely orchestrated him more brilliantly, so to speak, without changing his weave. When my town celebrated Benjamin Franklin's 200th anniversary, his town was Philadelphia, 2 unmitigated Boston words were spoken by illustrious guests from there. President Eliot was president of Harvard, president of Harvard, Eliot, was at pains to remind us in his address that Franklin's life had not been, in every particular, edifying. And Cabot Lodge told us plainly that Franklin was born in Boston. It brought a smile from Dr. Weir Mitchell, who said that, for a scholar of such historic erudition as Senator Lodge, this statement was a surprise. It was generally known that Benjamin Franklin had been born in Philadelphia at the age of 17. And just for good measure, we have a picture of Henry Cabot Lodge. And he goes through all the rest, Richard Henry Dana and William Howard Taft, and everybody. Everybody gets their time in the spotlight of his attention. And I am going to love rereading this. Absolutely love rereading it. And then the last book is also a bit on the biographical side. This is a replacement, so it is a keeper by virtue of the fact that I want it in hardcover, so I'll be getting rid of my paperback. This is the Illustrated Peeps. And this is selected and edited by Robert Latham, who some of you will know because he did a big, wonderful book called The Shorter Peeps, which is the best abridgment of the Diaries of Samuel Pepys that is imaginable. Even better, I admit, than Everybody's Pepys, in terms of how much you get and in terms of the scholarship that appends it all. And much to my delight, Penguin Classics took The Shorter Peeps and made it their abridged Pepys, which is great. But I love the illustrations in the Illustrated Peeps. I absolutely love them. And I also used my Illustrated Peeps. I have the trade paperback, which is on its last leg, so I was very happy to find this in a hardcover. I used the paperback to stick in documents of all kinds that pertain to Pepys. Whenever there's a new book about Pepys or his time, I tend to save the reviews of that book, fold them, cut them neatly, date them, and then put them in my copy of the Illustrated Peeps. But it's full to bursting now. It's only a paperback. It's not meant to be engorged like that. This can be endlessly. So I will give the paperback a respectful burial, and this will be the Peeps, the Peeps, the Illustrated Peeps volume that I use from here on out. So there you go. That was a Brattle without a landslide. That was a Brattle haul without a landslide. So we have the Illustrated Peeps. Robert Latham, always the guy you want put yourself in his hands when you're talking about writing about Pepys. Then we have The Story of a Friendship. The writer Owen Wister writing about Theodore Roosevelt, the Theodore Roosevelt that he knew. This was the Johnny We Hardly Knew You of its day. Then we have The Life of David Hume. Nice, big, thick, magisterial life of Hume that will be a keeper in the biography shelf. Then we have If by Sea by George Doggen. This is his follow-up to his great book on the War of 1812. We have Charles Sumner and the Coming of the Civil War by David Herbert Donnell, which I got as a relatively flimsy trade paperback because I don't have the hardcover with a dust jacket. The Brattle will provide, eventually. Then we have The 17th Degree by the great Mary McCarthy, a collection of her more fiery nonfiction. I will read as much of it as I can. I will love it all, but I don't expect it to last. I need a better version. Then we have William James in the Maelstrom of American Modernism by Robert Richardson, one of his big biographies of great 19th century Americans. We have Poison Penmanship by Jessica Mitford, which I am very happy to find, although I'm waiting to find Decca, the collection of her letters. Then we have Esto Perpetua by Hilaire Bellock. No, if I move, then I'm going to lose all these things. This has all become just an incredibly tense struggle not to have books fall to the floor. And why, you might ask? Because I'm not filming on my bed. When I'm filming on the bed, that's not a problem, because I have the bed. But I can't do that in this new arrangement of this room. I can't do that until it's warmer and I can brace the tripod in the open window. I'm not going to do that in the middle of winter. But the last two things we have here are mass markets. So Murder at the ABA and Destination Void by Frank Herbert. So that is my, can I do a full Steve pyramid? That is my Brattle haul for today. I have no idea if this is an escalation or a de-escalation. but I got a bunch of books at the Brattle, and I was going to get them anyway, and I couldn't do that without showing them to you. So I'm gonna wrap this up for now. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.